If you have websites that you guys use a lot in your organization, you can take advantage of content download jobs to automatically download content from an external website, either on a regular scheduled basis or just as a one-time deal. Now this feature is largely underused, probably because it's not generally high on the priority list of things to do for us administrators, but as a proactive ISA server administrator, your boss is probably going to be pleased to hear that you took a moment to discover what sites are being hit on a regular basis and grabbing that content at a time where bandwidth might be cheaper or it's not quite being used so heavily. So suppose each morning you know that a lot of your people in your company visit the same website, such as a news site. Maybe it's a site where you download the latest marketing report or sales figures. Maybe it's Winstructor and you need the latest videos. So rather than having lots of bandwidth being consumed when people are starting work, you could set up a job to go and fetch that data beforehand, say at 7 or 8 a.m. when no one's using the internet connection, and when everyone arrives at 8:30 in the morning, the data's already there, sitting waiting patiently at your ISA server. So whatever your motivation for prefetching data, when you have a hugely popular site that you notice is always getting hit at a certain time, that could be a candidate for prefetching the data a little bit earlier so you can avoid the rush hour, so to speak. So in our ISA server here, under our server, we'll expand configuration and we'll choose cache. Now you will of course need to have configured your cache drive first, so if you haven't done that yet, I'd suggest that you go back to a previous video and set that up. It's just a matter of selecting the cache drive tab here, clicking on the link, choosing a drive where you want the cache to be created, type in a value here and click set. Now once you've applied that change, you'll be to the point where we are now. So let's get stuck into talking about these content download jobs. Well, in the middle of the console, we'll select the Content Download Jobs tab. In the previous video on caching, we saw that by default, our ISA server will cache objects as people access them, and how to use and create rules to determine how we would cache certain locations. But that sort of caching we looked at is only reactive caching. ISA server doesn't just go off and fetch content at its leisure for fun, it waits until a user requests it. But there are times you're going to want ISA server to be more proactive and go off and fetch something that no one's even asked for yet. Now by default here you can see there aren't any scheduled content jobs, so we'll create one by clicking on the link here to schedule a content download job. And we'll get a message here telling us that our scheduled content jobs are only going to run when the local host network is set to listen for web proxy client requests, which is already configured by default anyway, and when the scheduled download job configuration group is enabled in system policy. So do we want ISA server to configure these things for us? Well, we'll say yes, and ISA server will configure everything it needs. So obviously we'll need to first apply this change. So we'll click apply. Now that that's been done, we'll click on schedule a content job link again, and this time a wizard starts up. And we'll need to give our scheduled content job a name, so I'll call this one www.winstructor.com. And I'm just going to copy that because we'll need that later on. We'll click Next. All right, now how often do we want this job to run? We could run it one time only straight after we've finished this wizard. We could choose to run it one time only but at a scheduled date. We could choose to run it daily or weekly. So I'm going to set this job to run daily. And down the bottom here, you'll notice that in order for this job to be able to run, we do need to ensure that the Microsoft ISA Server Job Scheduler service is set to running. Otherwise, this and any other jobs that we create simply aren't going to run. Now, this service does start automatically, but if we click on Start, we'll go to Administrative Tools and choose Services. If we scroll down a bit, you'll notice, if we expand this so we can see what's going on, we've got our Microsoft ISA Server Job Scheduler service, which is set to start, and it's also configured to start automatically. So if you are having problems, do come in here and just check that your system is set this way. All right, well, back in our wizard, we'll click Next. And we can set the date and time when we want that job to run. Now, our default here is to run this job one time each day, but you can choose to repeat this job and run it multiple times a day if you like. I'm just going to leave the defaults and click Next. And now here we'll need to enter in the URL that we want to download the content from. So I'm going to enter in http winstructor.com, and here we can choose to tell our job to not follow any links that might be on the site that point to a location outside of this URL. So in other words, if on this winstructor.com homepage there was a link to microsoft.com, by checking this box, we're telling this content job not to head off to the microsoft.com URL to grab any content from that third-party site. Now, if you do choose to allow this job to follow links to external sites, well, you could also choose, and you probably should choose, to tell ISAServer not to follow links that are a certain amount of levels deep. Or in other words, let's say that the Winstructor website has a link to another site. Let's say a link to a patch from Microsoft.com. And that page has a link pointing to a page on another site. And that page has a link to another external site, and so forth. Potentially an unlimited amount of links. Well, we could prevent it from getting into a situation where it tries to download everything. Now that's not really a good idea. So here, I'm going to exert some control, and we'll say we only want to go a maximum of 2 external links per page. Now the other default here is to limit the number of objects we'll download to a maximum of 60,000 and only open up a maximum of 4 connections at one time. Alright, well that's fine. We'll click Next. And the default here is to only cache content that the source and request headers indicate should be cached. But we can choose to cache all content, or all content plus the dynamic content as well. The other default here is to use the time to live that's already set in our cache rule, which we've seen in an earlier video, or we could override it with values that we can set here, specially for this content. Alright, well I'm going to leave these defaults. We've seen all this stuff before in the previous video anyway. We'll click Next, and then we're done. So we'll click Finish, and our new content download job is complete. Alright, so there it is. There's our new content download job, and ordinarily we'd have to wait until the time that we'd set for the job to start in order to verify that our job's working. And you'll note that if we scroll over here to the right, you can see that the status of our job is currently set to idle. Now recall that we could have created this job and told it to start immediately after our wizard, but that's okay since we do actually have the ability to force our jobs to start anyway. So we can force this job by simply selecting this job here in the list, and we can come over here to our Tasks pane, and we can click on Start Selected Jobs Now, and over here you can see now that the status of our job has changed to running. So the first thing we should do is verify that our job is caching the site correctly. So to check this, we'll come over here to the far left side of our console, we'll click on the monitoring link, and as you can see here in the middle of this screen we've got a lot of tabs, but the one that we're looking for is the logging tab here over on the far right. Now in the Tasks pane here, we'll click on Configure Web Proxy Logging Link. Now I'm not going to worry about this log tab right now since we'll cover monitoring and logging in another video. We're just going to click on the Fields tab. And here you'll note that we've got a long list of various fields that ISAServer will be logging. However, since this video is all about caching, if we scroll down to the bottom, you'll see here that we're currently not logging cache information. So we're going to check that box and we'll click OK, and then we'll need to apply the change. Okay, well now that we've set up our logging, in order to see any of the data that's being captured, we'll need to start a query. So from the task pane here, we'll select Start Query. In fact, I'm firstly going to edit the filter because we've got a previous one sitting here at the moment. So let's change this. We'll click Update and then start this query. Alright, now that's going to go off and it's going to tell our ISAServer to report back the live data as to what's happening with our server. Now we won't be able to see our scheduled job from winstructor.com as that should have just already run. So we're going to run it again, but first I'm going to stop this query here and I'm going to right click here on our columns and choose Add Remove Columns, and we'll scroll down and we'll select Cache Information and we'll choose to add that to our list of displayed columns here, and we'll click OK. And now if we scroll over to the right, we'll be able to see the URL and our cache information columns. Alright, so let's click on Start Query again, and I'm quickly going to go back to our cache on the left hand side here, and we'll select our Winstructor scheduled job and we'll choose to stop that job and let's start it again. Okay, and we can see that it's now running. So let's go back to our monitoring link. And as you can see, if we scroll over to the right here, we're seeing that we're getting a lot of GET requests here for data from the winstructor.com website. Now, if we choose to sort this by URL, and we'll just scroll right up to the top there, here we can see the Winstructor website content that's being stored on our ISA server. And there you go, we've got a bunch of various URLs coming from winstructor.com. So here we can see we've got a bunch of green entries that are indicating successes, and we should also see probably a few red ones indicating failures, which would be most likely where the ISA server is trying to access content that requires authentication. So in this video, we've seen how to implement content download jobs, or what I like to call proactive caching. Using a web cache really does speed up viewing websites the second time around. After all, that data needs to be retrieved to get into the cache first. But by using a scheduled download job, well, that's one way of prefetching this data and having it ready for you to view whenever you need it. Now imagine enjoying the speed benefits and the bandwidth savings you'll get by configuring the cache component of ISA Server when you have 2 or more users. So now you should be able to implement the ISA Server content download jobs in your company, and I think you'll be glad that you did. So we hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'd like to thank you for watching.